apart and in a barn. No kidding, truly a barn find aircraft. His workers surprised him, bought it without him knowing about it, and started restoring it, and then brought him into the picture and showed him this airplane, and he got real emotional and said that's why it ended up being restored to the degree that it was restored to. There are pictures in a picture book that show what's going on, and when I saw the pictures, that's when I decided that this would in fact be a pretty good deal. You saw the for sale sign on the propeller. It was $40,000. I feel like that was a steal in today's environment. A Cessna 172 now, the ones that I learned in 2000, 2001, that was sold for 30 grand or 90, you know? So this is a pretty good deal, I think. This is Harold when he took delivery of this aircraft back in the day. Sadly, his museum did not have a very good profit picture. They couldn't figure out how to make money. And so they had to liquidate this tri-pacer and several other short wing Pipers. Y'all probably know more about this than I do, but there's a family of aircraft that have shorter wings than Cubs and Super Cubs, and the Piper did that to save money back in the day, and they created this line of short wing Pipers, which are, you know, people are pretty fanatical about. The tri-pacer, the pacer, the vagabond, the flipper, etc. Before I went, I want to put y'all in my frame of mind for a quick second. I've got a pretty good amount of hours now. I've got almost 1,200 hours. I started flying in the year 2000, and in Atlanta, and I got my license in 2001. But and I had a close call with. I had an emergency. I landed on a highway with my wife and daughter. I had about 330 hours or so. Great landing in Mississippi. Contacted a pickup truck upon rollout. That's what I like to tell people. You know, that was the end of that Mooney. But nobody was hurt. It was all good. Shoulder harnesses and safety equipment provided. But I'm not like some of y'all. I don't have the vast experience, you know, through this aviation field. I've built hours a little bit at a time. You know, came from the journalism world. We did a little bit at a time whenever we had money. But you know, I never undertaken a project like this. So I felt like before I left on the first day, I wanted to fuel up and have one of my favorite meals, which is a smoked salmon and a bagel, you know, out in Oregon, and they have fresh smoked salmon. They literally almost fish them out of the river and provide them for you. So I had a good first meal in case it was going to be my last meal. Okay, I just want you to know where I'm going with this. And so yeah, so I got introduced to the aircraft through a firm called TAC Aero. And Brian here is the owner of TAC Aero, T-A-C-A-E-R-O. And they provide a lot of backcountry instruction in Super Cubs. They have since moved their main teaching operation from Oregon to Fredericksburg, not Virginia, but Texas. And so they did that so they would have better weather. When I went flying to get checked out in this airplane, it was super windy, and I figured we weren't going to go. I'm like, man, I'm from Frederick, Maryland. You know, my instructor, Lars Lundquist, who came and met me up at AirVenture this year, is so cool that he came and said hello. But, you know, I set up some instruction, knowing that I had this route here, and this is the route that I had planned. I printed this route out, and it took, on ForeFlight, and it was 4 sheets of paper, okay? So I divided it into day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Now the flight ended up taking me 5 days altogether because, as you saw and heard, I had a flat tire. But first I had to get through learning how to fly. So we learned and explored the flight envelope of the tri-pacer. This is sort of the route that we did out near Hood River. It was blowing 20 to 32 knots that day, and I figured we weren't going. I was like, hey, Lars, time to start drinking beers. I guess we're not going. He goes, ha ha, get in the airplane, it's pre-flighted. So I was like, okay, if it was Frederick, I wouldn't have gone, but this to them is like no big deal. So I learned how to fly that airplane in like 20 to 30 knots. So I feel pretty confident in it now, to be quite honest with you. So this is the planned route for the first day, basically Hood River to Boise, Idaho, Pocatello, Idaho. Okay, not gonna go over the Rockies just yet. On the first day, Dave Hirschman, my mentor and flight instructor and friend to many of y'all, coached me on the route. Here's the day T. Here's what you do. You go to Baker, Montana. You drop down. You go through this valley here, and you work your way towards Cheyenne, Wyoming. And I said, well, Alicia Heron, our West Coast correspondent, said to go to Casper, Wyoming. And he said, Casper, Wyoming. You will not go to the friendly ghost of Casper, Wyoming. It's too windy. You will go to Cheyenne, Wyoming. And if Hirschman tells you something, just pretty much take it to the bank. So I figured I would go to Cheyenne. But before that, I had to get to as far as I can get, Pocatello, Idaho. I did not get that far. I ended up at Mountain Home, Idaho, because, like Alicia Heron said, David, don't plan to do 600 miles your first day. Bite off about 300 miles or 400, something that's adequate. So you're going to be tired. It's all new. She was exactly right. I landed at Mountain Home, Idaho. So took off here from Hood River. And this is some of the scenery. I want y'all to notice one thing on the panel. The ball is to the right on turn bank, and as you can see, I've got a little bit of left aileron in there, and I flew that way for 2,100 miles. So right rudder to center the ball and left aileron. I could not figure out why a museum restored airplane would fly crooked, but it flew crooked the whole way. More on that in a moment. So here I am. Oh, hey, let's go. I'm wearing, a little hoodie and no gloves, and that was a big mistake. This is about the first thing I see, and it's like 9,000 foot mountains here. There's no BS. It's the real deal. So, like you saw in the video, there's like hardly anyone anywhere, and Mountain Home was the first stop. So I landed at Mountain Home, and it's blowing, the whole time on this trip it's blowing 20 knots to 25, 30 knots the whole way, all the way until I crossed the last ridge of the mountains over here west of us. And please do note that those are chains that are holding the airplane down and not rows. I mean, it's some serious wind out there. I fueled up again at night. I ate half of that ginormous burger. I packed the other half of it with me and had it the next day at lunch at Rock Springs, Wyoming. I went to get an early start, which is not like me. Those that know me know I don't do well in the morning. But I couldn't go because there was frost all over the aircraft. So I wiped most of the frost off with a hotel towel that was donated by me, liberated, I'll say. And then I pointed the airplane into the sun so it would evaporate and melt the rest of it. So, you're out on your own, you don't know what's going on, you kind of have a timetable. I was already on a different, flight path than I thought, and I just wanted to keep going. This is Tom Hogue. He is the airport manager at Mountain Home, Idaho, and he is from Maryland. So I'm trying to fill my airplane up with fuel, freezing my what's off, and I couldn't get the fuel pump to work. I'm standing there, it's freezing, I've been flying all day. I was really fatigued, and I hear an airplane start up behind me, and then I'm thinking, oh my God, now I'm holding someone else up. And they want to taxi up and get fuel and that kind of thing. Well, it turns out it's Tom, he comes up there and he goes, hey, can I help you? You know, what's going on? I said, man, I can't get this self-serve fuel pump to work. Sorry, I'm holding you up. I'm sure, you know, you got things to do. He goes, hey, man, nobody can figure out that fuel pump. The guys are coming to fix it in the morning. Here's what you do. And he goes, I was starting my airplane up because I'm doing a lesson at sunset. So no worries. Here's the key to the van. You need to stay at the Mountain Home Inn, and you tell them Tom sent you. And you need to walk across the parking lot and you can get a hamburger at the whatever the name of that restaurant was. We just did exactly that. The airport people gave me a 10% discount because I knew Tom. So I'm just saying, dropping names and meeting and being friendly with people is a pretty good way to go. So here's plans for the next day. And like I said, plans change. I was originally looking at Casper. Dave Hirschman said to go to Cheyenne. Cheyenne is off, it's like due east. Tom at Mountain Home Airport said, oh no, don't do what Dave said and don't do what Alicious said. Now I'm like really confused. Like, well, what the hell do I do, man? So she said to go to Casper, Hirschman said to go to Cheyenne, and so he said, well, what you want to do is go right across the mountains and you end up in Rock Springs, Wyoming. I'm like, yeah, but I've hiked out there and it's like, you know, they're like big mountains there, like 12,000 feet tall. He goes, that's fine. You fly at 11,500 feet, and as you saw me say on video, you pick to the left and pick to the right. Those are words out of his mouth. And you'll see the mountains before you get to them, David, and just make sure you pick the right direction. And well, then you have to think about which way is the wind coming. If the wind is coming over the top from the west, am I going to be sinking in this wind, or is it going to help me rise up over the next ridge? And this is really important in a 135 horsepower aircraft at 11,500 feet, 12,000 feet. So I still didn't really know how much danger I was potentially in, and with a smile on my face, I head out. Now I'm like fixing across the Rockies, and it's the real deal, y'all. But it's doable, and if you do stick to the plan, you can get it done. This is real high plateau terrain and mountains mixed in. It kind of has anyone here done this cross country? I'm assuming half of y'all have. Okay, and so I know Eric and Rodney for sure. And you can pick the northern route, which is like I-80. Yeah, I-80, and then there's I-40, and then there's I-10 if you want to go down through Texas and stuff like that. I went basically across the middle, sort of I-80-ish for most of it.
Wouldn't that be I-70?
And I-70, correct. I-70, not as far north as I-80, right? It's I-70 mostly, correct. This is actually a pretty cool. It's kind of gonna be loud, but it's a pretty cool little video. So I was really happy. I'm like fixing across the Rockies, and I do like this little 360 kind of a thing, to kind of celebrate here. And it's just pretty. It's like. It's God's country. It's just gorgeous, but no civilization anywhere. I ended up crossing the mountains at the Medicine Bow Wilderness, and these are some of the peaks that are right up at sort of the highest level that on my route. The Medicine Bow Wilderness, and this is about when I got the call from ATC, and until that point, I felt pretty confident. I'm like, okay, I got flight following, I'm flying 11,500 feet. Now I know the airplane, I know how much fuel it uses, and how long it could take, to get somewhere. I tried to plan 3 hour legs, 3.5 maybe. Some of them I extended a little bit past 4, but I figured I was real high and doing better on mileage. But when they called on the frequency and asked me what my intentions were, it just absolutely freaked me out. It was like someone punctured a balloon. My confidence went to like 0. And I could see the other side. It was right before this view right here. I could see that valley that you see right now. I could see it. And so at that point I said, well, they freaked me out, but I can see the valley on the other side. I know Rock Springs is down there. I will do fine. And it was snowing a little bit. There's snow showers on the left there. And I get to Cheyenne, Wyoming. And so these are the ramp workers at Cheyenne, Wyoming, and it was blowing. I used to do some windsurfing, and it was a phrase we used, blowing like steam. That's kind of like what was happening. Has anyone ever landed at Cheyenne, Wyoming? Well, let me tell you about Cheyenne, Wyoming. Here's your first clue that it's going to be windy. There, you know those giant windmills that we have just across a couple of ridges over here on the Appalachians? They have them at the end of the runway. Okay? So it's your first clue. You're coming in to the airport and you see these windmills, you know, be prepared. It's pretty windy. It was about 20 degrees, 20 degrees, and the wind was blowing about 25. And I pulled up, and this woman Lauren said, "Well, do you want to put it in a hanger or tie it down?" And I was like, "Well, how much is a hanger?" It's $80 a night. I said, "Oh no, tie it down." And I was like, "Okay." She said, "Fine." She goes and gets chains again. Then she started to tie it down, and I must have stood out by the airplane for like 3 minutes. I couldn't feel my fingers. And I said, "Lauren, I hate to do this to you. Let's put this airplane in the hangar, you know, because I figured it's that cold, it's not going to be good for anybody." So we put it in the hangar. I paid $80. I was happy to do so. Here is the route from Rock Springs to Cheyenne. It's pretty straight, you know, and then right here is Medicine Bow Wilderness, like right there. I tried to draw like a circle on that, it didn't. I don't know why it didn't say it that way. Anyway, so but that's where I cross. Where is it? It's basically at the corner of Utah and Wyoming, and it's kind of like it's kind of like where the corners are, but the northern, not the Four Corners area, but north of there. And a lot of people do cross the Rockies there because it's a better place to go. Rodney, I don't know if you have input. So I did that. And then, okay, my planned next day was to go from Casper, which is, like I said, it was my original plan, to FSW, which I even forgot what that was. But that didn't happen anyway. So I went from Cheyenne to this little airport in Nebraska, and that is where, and I was having like trouble with I wasn't having fuel management trouble, but I was having kind of some challenges figuring out what was my fuel flow, because when I was flying high, I was getting like 6.9 gallons an hour. The aircraft holds 36 gallons of fuel, 18 on the right and 18 on the left. So if you do the math on that, you should have like 2.5 hours on the left and 2.5 on the right if you're want to go down to zero. So I figured 3 hour to 4 hour legs were okay. But the right fuel tank in a tri-pacer and a pacer, the back pickup, this is a little in the weeds, it has 2 pickups on the right side and the right tank. And if you are flying anything with straight level, you can't use all the fuel in the right tank. Okay, you stop it with like 6 or 8 gallons. You just can't do it. It won't pick it up. And now, don't forget, the airplane was flying crooked. Okay, right? So I was never really getting an adequately good reading about how can I run the right tank dry? How much is that? So I was running out of fuel right over this airport, and that is where I met, it was Gail Radcliffe. And so a call on the radio, I'm planning to go 15 more miles. And that ain't that far, right? And then the right tank ran out of fuel. I still had fuel in the left tank, but I said, well, it's a sign from up above that it's time to land and get fuel. Here's Gail. He was, he's a little elderly. It was really cold. I'm wearing 2 pairs of gloves now, which you can kind of see. Can you tell it's windy? A little bit. And so it was just tough conditions. And yeah, his fuel truck wasn't working. He was trying to talk to me on the radio, saying don't land. I couldn't hear him. I landed anyway. You heard the story about the fuel truck. But we were able to start it up, because it's a short wing Piper. I was able to taxi it into like a real kind of a small area and get back in there where the truck had stalled out. He would not let me pay for the gas. I handed him cash money, and he said, put it back in your pocket, because if you didn't come and land here, I wouldn't have got my butt in the truck and hauled ass in it across the airport to park it in front of the airport for the next person. So you did me a favor. So I said, okay, man. So Gail was a good guy. So I went from there. You saw on the video, I hit some snow showers. I went high to avoid them. It started to get dark. I'm starting to think about, okay, it's getting dark. I'm above the clouds. I need to get below the clouds. It's snowing below the clouds. I had a Stratus, a portable Stratus, ADSB for weather. And that helped me a lot. I depended on that. I had a backup ADSB in called a Scout. I don't know if y'all heard of that. Little big pencil looking thing. So I had 2 of those devices helping me with weather and traffic. I get near Columbia Airport. I call in. They tell me to whatever runway they told me to land on. Of course, I'm a little confused now. And landed there before. I thought I was set up for right downwind, runway 22 or whatever it was, and it was a towered field. He said, "No, you're set up for a left downwind for runway XYZ." I was like, "Okay, sorry, I'll take left downwind." He said, "Fine, clear to land, follow the Cessna." So they were nice. I called the tower later and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm a dumbass." And he said, "Hey, man, I'm sorry. No problem. You're good." I was happy to be on the ground. This is some of the pretty scenery, the Missouri River, crossing through the breadbasket of the United States. So I land, and I'm there in Columbia, Missouri, or Columbus. I get confused. And you'll hear why in a second. And so this woman is in the corner, and she's back in there, and her son is this guy. And so he was in the pattern with an instructor named Clayton. And so this kid was getting his last flight before his check ride, which was going to be on a Monday. And so why did he decide to fly? Because his mama got her license. So he said, if she could do it, I could do it. So now she sent me a note. He got his check ride done on that Monday. He is a pilot now. And there is Clayton, the flight instructor that befriended me. He knew I didn't have a car, and he said, "Hey, I'll take you to your hotel. Where is it?" I told him. He goes, "Hope you're not hungry. There's no food out that way." And I said, "Clayton, are you hungry?" He said, "I'm hungry." I said, "DT's buying, man. You take us where you want to go." And so he did, and it was St. Patty's weekend, so we were greeted with free caps, and we had some beer and great sandwiches at this restaurant. And he's a great guy. He also stopped by the AOPA booth at AirVenture to say hello. And he and the flight instructor, Lars, from Oregon, were nearby at the same time, and I said, "Hey, I need to introduce both of y'all to each other." Because one was an aspiring flight instructor with a few hours, and the other was, an experienced flight instructor. They got together and they hit it off. It's really cool. So my next gig was I wanted to end up at Lancaster, Ohio, which is on the left, and then go all the way from Lancaster to Frederick to here. That's not an undoable deal in one day. I didn't get going that far because I went from Columbia, Missouri to Columbus, Indiana, where I had a flat tire on a Sunday afternoon. And pretty scenery on the way, but here's the flat tire. And the tube inside the tire had been made with a deformity. and it looked like a piece of thread or something was in there. It looked like the shape of a heart, but that was no love for me. That was a flat tire, and it was because the air was leaking out of that spot, and maybe when it was stamped, it was thinner there, and they just picked Columbus, whatever it was, and you picked that airport to be played. I went right past this picture because the night before, again, it's like I land and it's like, I landed in snow showers and, trying to figure out what to do with Clayton and everything. And the line folks are going, all right, we'll fill your airplane up with fuel. I said, okay, good, let's do it. And I was real particular about getting filled up with fuel, and so I always checked behind the people. So I get up on the left wing, and the fuel cap is on there, and it's pitch black now. And so they fuel the right side, they go, they fuel the other side, they go, hey, you want to check out that we put the cap on there? No, man, I'm sure you put the cap on there. Hell no, they didn't. So I flew that whole next day with one fuel cap not on the airplane. So always check your fuel caps if you are not fueling your aircraft. Lesson to the wise, be wise. This guy Scott over at Columbus, Indiana, Columbus International Airport. Scott Bradley. I called him on the phone. The tower had already radioed him and told him that I was coming in with a flat tire. He came by and said, hey, he goes, I don't really have a social life, but Sunday afternoon I got somewhere to be tonight. I'll pick you up at 9 a.m. in the morning. He was there with 3 people at 9 a.m. And I told him, I said, by the way, I need a fuel cap. He goes, oh, I got a box of fuel caps. I'll figure out one that fits, and you can just have it. These things cost $100, just FYI. So he fixed me up with a fuel cap. New tire. I had my own tube, a couple of quarts of oil, and everything all together was $200. And you go to Spruce and get a tire, it's like $160. So I figured I was pretty good.
You always carry a spare tube there, Dave?
I carry a spare tube with me. Did they have any? Or why did I? Why did I?
Why?
Rodney, I figured I'm new to this flying across the country kind of thing. I mean, completely. I was thinking, well, if I carry a tube with me, and I also carried a little jack that I bought on Amazon that I highly do not recommend anyone to buy, because we couldn't figure out how to make the thing work. But I figured if maybe I would land in somewhere not good, and if I had a flat, at least if I had the tube, and it had like a little pump thing too, that I could maybe change the tube. But truthfully, you need 3 or 4 people to do all that. So no, I couldn't have done it. That's why. But it was a good thing I had the tube, because he didn't have to. He did have a tire. He told me, he said, hey man, you want to just reuse your tire? And I said, Scott, like I ride a motorcycle sometimes, and I would never reuse that motorcycle tire that looked like that. He goes, oh yeah, I guess you're right. So he threw it in the trash. But he was trying to save me some money. All right, so I fly from Columbus Municipal Airport. Scott Bradley, killer cool A&P IA guy. By the way, that's a really nice airport too. And the hotel we stayed at on the overnight, I've left this out. So I'm on the ramp when I landed. Y'all got a minute, or has anyone got to go? I still got the floor, okay. Land on the ramp, and there's a Cherokee 6 there with a flat tire. And I'm like, well, we must have both run over something on the runway. Cherokee 6 pilot said, well, he had been there a while. He was doing a compassion flight. He noticed his tire was low, filled it with air, put a pebble next to it, came back after 30 minutes. The tire had encompassed the pebble, so he decided that he had a leak also. I called Scott Bradley back on the phone before I left the airport and said, hey, you're going to get a 2-for-1. And so the next morning they fixed Preston up too. All right, so here we are. I've got I figured out how to fly in these kind of conditions. By the way, you needed thermal underwear, a hoodie, a down jacket, 2 pairs of gloves. So I got 1 pair of gloves on there, and a quick fun backstory about heat in an airplane. So, I mean, I'm flying myself across country, and it's just me. There's no one in the back seat, right? Just stuff. And so I opened the heat vent to the front. You know, not the back, just the front. There's 2 controls, one for the front people, one for the back people. I'm like, ain't no one in the back. Watch the air open the back. So I've flown for 3 days like this, freezing my, you know what's off. And finally I was like, I wonder what would happen if I opened that rear vent, even though no one's sitting back there. And what did happen, did you think? The air, everyone here play pool? You know what I'm talking about? The air went under the seat to the back seat, did a bank shot off the front of the back seat, another bank shot off the ceiling, went to the front of the cockpit, bank shot back into me again. So all of a sudden now the air is like hot air. It's like circulating in the cabin now. It took 3.5 days to figure that out. Like stupid pilot tricks. Who would have thought? And these airplanes don't come with much in the way of pilot operating handbooks. If anyone's got a older vintage aircraft, they're like 20 pages, and 10 of the pages are your fuel burn and stuff like that. So this is how the cockpit looked. You know, pretty sparse, but it got the job done. There's a sticky note on the panel because the mechanic at Hood River was learning how to fly in this airplane, and those were the V speeds that he was reminded to fly. And I just didn't take it off until I got back to Frederick. I don't know why. A lot of y'all might know Jason Cobb. He used to instruct over here at Frederick Flight Center. He is married to my former boss, Alyssa Cobb, and they live at Fairfield County Lancaster Airport in Ohio. So I stopped to visit with them and with Sean and Isabella, their kids, and Alyssa is real sweet. She came out and met me with a salad and everything, and that's where we ran into Al at the airport. And Al was telling me what he was really telling me was, hey, you've got a generator in your airplane. When you reduce power and you have your landing lights and radio on, you need to choose between one or the other until you get Chris to help you replace your tungsten lights with LED lights. Thank you, Chris. So, but that didn't happen until months after I got back here. But so yeah, landed in Frederick, and it's like no power, no nothing. But the last part of that journey, I was really excited about that. I even shot a picture of my iPad mini crossing the border. I don't know if you can see right there, it says Maryland. You know, I'm a transplanted Atlantan, but I call Maryland home, so I was really happy to see that on the map after like 2,000 miles. And I was making pretty good ground speed, 123. It's pretty good in a tri-pacer. And so I was pretty doggone happy to make it back here to Frederick. And Michelle Walker, a colleague of ours in the video department, shot that picture. So you saw this on video, a nice welcoming committee with Michelle and her husband Patrick, who some of y'all might know. They have a Cessna 140 out here on the ramp in front of y'all, and Colin Stagnito, our big boss at AOK in media and marketing. Here's a little more on the aircraft itself. It was really restored to a very high degree of perfection. And then we flew it nearby over in the Middleton Valley. What's the what's the name? Yeah, in that area. It's just beautiful over there. And then and Chris Rose shot this really cool picture of me just enjoying having, aircraft ownership again. And you saw the front of the airplane. So that is kind of like the story. And I hope there were some takeaways and some questions. Yes?
What time of year did you do this?
I did this in, okay, I couldn't.
Was that by design?
Okay, yes. I bought the airplane with the help of my brother Martin, who is a non-pilot. He lives in Atlanta, but he recognizes a pretty good deal. He got into muscle cars. He decided that he wanted to relive our youth and all the stuff we couldn't afford then. He started looking at those kind of cars and I said, hey, find me an airplane. You're looking at cars. And he said, yeah, every once in a while airplanes pop up. Because he goes, my search words are vintage and classic. So he had already sent me some airplane ideas. And I would look at them and go, nah, it's got a run out engine, or no, it's going to cost $20,000 for the avionics. And so, but I found this in September of last year, and actually purchased it with my brother on Halloween, October 31st, 2022. The weather was terrible from October until March the 10th of 2023. On March the 11th, I booked my ticket to go to Hood River because I saw there was going to be a high pressure system marching across the country from Washington and Oregon and steadily coming across the breadbasket all the way through to the East Coast. And Dave Hirschman and Alicia Heron and several other people had coached me into following a high pressure system where it could be windy. Indeed it was. But it's going to be good weather for the most part, except for the little tri-pacer outran that storm at one point. And so that's when you saw I got into a little bit of trouble. Rodney, by the way, helped me with the research of getting looking at the ownership and the title and things like that. So a quick plug for our PIC. They know what they're doing. But anyway, I couldn't pick it up until the middle of March, and that is technically still winter. So I did this flight during the winter time. I finished on March 20th, and it was 5 days altogether. It's 4 days of flying, 4 real days of flying, and one day where I kind of wasted half the day because I got to Columbus Airport at like 2:30 p.m., 3, and I could have made it all the way to Lancaster had I just fueled up and left, but I had a flat tire. So I spent the night. It sent me back, and the next morning I couldn't really leave until around 10 or 11. But yeah, so that's why. There was a reason why I didn't get it built. It was first available.
You said it flew sideways, but you didn't say what you did.
This is really interesting. So, how many of y'all have purchased an airplane and looked at logbooks? 3, 4. No one else has an airplane in this room? Or you just don't look at logbooks?
Built.
You built, okay, smart move. So, looking at the logbooks, I'm not an APIA, but I can look at logbooks and see what's going on. Well, nothing stood out to me that would be weird about the airplane. Why it flew crooked was really baffling to me, like a museum restored it, Another museum bought it, and APIA flew it to get the private pilot certificate. I don't get it. On October 31st, part of the deal for me to get the airplane was, hey, annual, make sure I had a little punch list of 2 or 3 things that weren't exactly right. And I said, hey, this paint's peeling off of here, touch this up, and I want an annual inspection because I didn't want to have to deal with it and get a ferry permit or any of that. During the annual inspection, the mechanic had an entry in the logbook that I missed. Okay, so let's bookmark it for 1 sec. I get this whole airplane all the way over here. I call the Short Wing Piper Club president up and Steve Carruthers said, Steve, airplane's flying crooked, I don't get it. He goes, oh, I'll tell you how to fix it. Take this wing off, you take that wing off, and you turn this thing, this strut that way, that one that way. Sometimes you need to get 2 or 3 people together. One of them holds the rudder, and the other one kind of bends the top of it over. But make sure you're bending it the right way after you determine which side of the airplane is really leaning on. I'm like, museum restored the airplane, man. I shouldn't be having to get people climbing over it, bending the rudder. Talked to some other people, and we were still baffled by it. Well, the mechanic that did the annual put a note in there, washed and waxed the entire airplane. I was like, okay, why would you even put that in a logbook? Well, when he washed and waxed the entire airplane, he apparently didn't remove the wax on above the left flap where the flap gap seal was, and so the left flap never retracted. It was hanging down 3 to 5 degrees, I don't know. And so 3 days before air finish, I'd already flown 3 more thousand miles in a crooked airplane. And I'm like going, oh shit, man, there's like wax up here. So I wiped it down, and then the flap went poop, right back to where it's supposed to be level. So what was wrong with it was the flap was out. It was an asymmetrical flap situation. But you could, if I looked over my shoulder, you couldn't really tell. After that, part of my pre-flight now is I walk around the airplane, make sure I pop up both flaps with the bottom back of my hand, make sure they're up. It's real tight. It's a real tight seal. Anyone here who flies aircraft with flap gap seals or maybe elevator seals should also, I would say, keep an eye on that in case something gets in there. Okay? So that was a good question. I hope I answered it. Any other questions? Yes.
Over the Rockies, since you went over a march, assuming it was, like you said, it was pretty cold.
It was damn cold.
Which, I'm assuming the pressure altitude helped you a lot to get over those high altitudes.
Yeah. The aircraft, in my opinion, performed well for those conditions. I didn't feel, or are you asking whether I feel threatened because I was so high and didn't have enough power?
Well, I'm wondering if having warmer out would have been.
It would have been not a great idea.
Yeah.
I would seriously rethink that if it was definitely I wouldn't do it on a summer day in an airplane like that. I would rethink that for sure. Perhaps choose the more southern route, I-10 route. I think it might be lower. But yes, the fact that it was the middle, it's still winter time, certainly helped a lot. I was very worried about the direction of the wind. The wind was blowing at altitude, the same as it was blowing on the ground, about 30 knots, 20 to 30 knots. It wasn't like blowing 60 up there. But it still caused me concern because when I was crossing over, the highest part of the mountains, there were still ridges on the left side. The wind was coming from the left, from the west, and I didn't want to be in the downdraft of it. I wanted to be in the upside. So I didn't have that much mountain experience. I mean, let's face it, I had 3 hours. So I was really concerned about that. So I really critiqued the wind, and I used that Stratus device. Did anyone here have one of those? Or ADS-BN and some sort? Yeah, I really use that to look at the winds in route a lot, and the winds on the ground as well to kind of extrapolate what was going on as a safety factor. And then I was rolling the dice, hoping I was making a smart move.
Did the Stratus and the flight work well? Did you ever lose any connections or?
Okay, that's a really good question. The Stratus never lost the connection. It's the Stratus that AOPA has, and we can borrow it. So I didn't own it. The backup one that I have, which is called a Scout, it's a little beady thing. It's really neat, and I would carry it with me all the time. That thing is not reliable. As far as the Stratus about a week ago, saw a Stratus 2S on Facebook Marketplace and called the person and said, hey, if you really have that, I really would like to buy it. And it was a Pilot in Pensacola, and I bought it. She flies, she was a CFI for a long time. She said she got a job flying American Eagle or something like that, and she didn't need it. So yeah, the Stratus is a good one. Then the Scout, I don't want to badmouth it. I'm glad it had the little thing, but it's not as dependable, and I don't know why that is. You know, but it needs. One has the internal battery, one has the external. But those were key pieces of equipment. Oh, the other thing, the airplane avionics is a GPS comm in the airplane. It's got a Garmin 250 XL. It's a VFR GPS, and from day one, the comm part worked okay, but I could never get the GPS to work. Like it would, like I bought a database, update and everything, and the it would tell me the waypoint of the airport. You know, that whatever airport you're at, it would say here are the runways and the comm frequencies and all, but it would never lock onto the satellites. So I didn't have a panel mounted GPS for 2,100 miles. Then another 1,500 miles to Nashville, Tennessee and back, then another 1,000 miles to Greensboro, North Carolina and back. So that's what, all that's like 5,000 miles? They're like, flew 5,000 miles with like no GPS. So, and no VOR. But the Stratus thing worked fine. I had an iPad mini and my phone, and that stuff worked good. The guys at TAC Aero said, hey, we navigate with an iPad, in our Super Cubs, it's an iPad mini. And one of those Stratus things, or the built-in one, you know, that's like a panel transponder. Anyway, Chris, y'all's own Chris, helped me fix my airplane. Someone had cut the antenna wire at some point along the way up by where the antenna is mounted, like on the wings. I saw it, and I was like, oh, well, I'll just, and they taped it back together. I said, oh, maybe that's why it doesn't work. I'll buy a connector, a crimping connector kit for coax, and I crimp that stuff back together. And I could do that. I mean, I've put car stereos in before, you know. So I'll buy this crimping connector kit and these crimps and the coax and all. And so, at the same time, I said, well, I'll just buy a new antenna wire just in case. I did the crimping thing. Felt like I did a pretty good job with it. Didn't matter. Things still didn't work. The antenna didn't work. Never saw satellites. And finally, Tom Young, who y'all know Tom, he's like, and I was telling him about it, because that stuff never works, man. You need to buy a new antenna cable. And I was like, I got a new antenna cable. And he goes, put it on, you know. So I did put it on. Chris helped me with that. It needed a new antenna cable and a new antenna, which is identical antenna to what I already had, but I had purchased another antenna used, and with the new used antenna, the new used cable, everything worked. And so it was the splice that didn't work. So don't splice your cable.
So you're flying out there and you're out west, and comms is hard, and it sounds like you were flying pretty low.